Don't take my life from me.
When the judge announced a sentence of life in prison with no chance for parole.
What kind of person laughs at death? Not out of madness, but pride. In a silent Milwaukee courtroom, a teenager's smirk became a weapon, slicing through the grief of parents who just lost their only son. Cameras caught it. The world replayed it. And suddenly justice itself felt mocked. This isn't a story about a robbery gone wrong. It's about a boy who believed fear was power, and a courtroom that proved him wrong in the most explosive way possible.
Appears to have a tear in his eye as a jury finds him guilty of first-degree murder. He is convicted of shooting and killing.
The night everything ended.
And the need to protect the community, which I also fear for with Mr. Jackson.
July 6th, 2009. A humid summer night in Milwaukee's River West neighborhood, when streetlights flickered against brick walls and footsteps echoed down empty blocks. For 21-year-old Nathan Potter, a film student walking home from a friend's place, the night was supposed to be ordinary, quiet, maybe even peaceful. But for 19-year-old Shawnell Jackson, it was the night he chose to prove something twisted to himself. Not for money, not for survival, just power.
Being out in the community.
Shawnell had grown up on the city's rough edges, where the sound of sirens was as common as laughter. His childhood was marked by loss and rage. Raised by his mother, Rashette Jackson, without knowing his father, he carried the scars of a boy who never had direction, only impulse. His world was built on reaction. Fight first, think later. The streets became his classroom, and violence, his language. That night, Shawnell and his 20-year-old accomplice, Derek Thomas, were hunting. Not for opportunity, but for someone weaker, someone unaware. They spotted Nathan walking alone, backpack slung across his shoulder, the kind of target who looked harmless, even kind. They demanded money. Nathan didn't have any. His hands were raised, his voice calm, pleading maybe, but never threatening. It should have ended there.
I am going to go ahead on count 1, the first-degree intentional homicide conviction.
It was execution style. Brutal, meaningless, final. The neighborhood awoke to the sound of sirens slicing through the dawn. Police cordoned off the scene, marking every drop of blood, every shell casing. Neighbors whispered about the two shadows running through the alley. For Nathan's parents, John and Denise, that night became an unending replay in their minds. A son who left for a walk home and never returned. Back in Milwaukee, detectives pieced together fragments of the truth. Derek Thomas's confession, ballistic matches, and witnesses who saw a young man in a black hoodie near the scene. The puzzle pointed in one direction, and when Shawnell's uncle finally called the police, saying, "He's here," the game was over. The boy who smirked at death.
Jackson to life imprisonment without possibility for extended supervision.
When detectives brought Shawnell Jackson into custody, they expected fear, maybe tears, maybe denial. What they got instead was a grin. A slow, defiant curl of the lips that didn't match the gravity of what he'd done. To the seasoned officers in that Milwaukee interrogation room, his face was unforgettable. Not because of guilt, but because of the lack of it. He sat there like he was above consequence, like the world still owed him something. They asked him about Nathan Potter. He shrugged. They showed him photos from the scene. Nathan's body on the pavement, the blood, the evidence markers glowing under police lights. He glanced at them, unbothered. "Yeah," he said. "That's him." Then he leaned back and smirked again. That smirk became his signature, a symbol of everything broken inside him. The detectives pressed harder, wanting to understand why. Was it about money? One asked. "No," he said simply. He just didn't listen. The answer hit harder than the confession.
I know that that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases.
His words chilled the room. The casual tone, the hollow bragging, it was the language of someone detached from humanity. One detective later recalled that he didn't act like a kid scared of prison, but like someone waiting for applause. His arrogance extended beyond the police station. When news of his arrest spread, the community was stunned. How could a teenager act so remorselessly after taking an innocent life? Nathan Potter was known for his kindness, creativity, and quiet energy. To hear his killer laugh in court later would add a level of cruelty that no one could have predicted.
I believe that this case...
Chanel's family didn't know what to do with him. His mother, Rachette, pleaded publicly, saying, "My son is not a monster," but the evidence said otherwise. Footage from his interrogation, the cold smirks, the indifferent tone. It was as if he enjoyed the attention. He'd grown up surrounded by chaos, and now, even in the grip of justice, he thrived on it. Inside jail, Chanel became a name inmates whispered about. The teen who laughed after murder. Some saw him as fearless, others thought he was insane. But what he really was hollow. The facade of control, of arrogance, was a mask shielding a boy whose emotions had long rotted away. Still, even in confinement, he didn't stop performing. During preliminary hearings, he made faces at reporters, rolled his eyes at the judge, and whispered jokes to his attorney while the Potter family sat feet away, holding each other in silent agony. A family's worst nightmare. John and Denise Potter never imagined they'd one day sit in a courtroom, forced to look into the eyes of their son's killer. Nathan had been their dreamer, their quiet achiever, the kind of young man who made others feel lighter just by being around. He was a film student at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, filled with stories he wanted to tell, lives he wanted to capture. His life was just beginning. But one senseless act had turned it all into a headline. The morning after Nathan's death, John stood in the morgue, staring at his son's lifeless body. He later said it didn't feel real, that a parent's mind fights to reject what their eyes see. Denise, his mother, described hearing the words, "Your son didn't make it," as a moment when everything inside her went silent. The house that once echoed with laughter became a grave of memories. Days turned into weeks, but the pain never softened. Milwaukee police promised justice, but for the Potters, justice could never balance the loss. They remembered the way Nathan used to stay up editing films, the smell of popcorn when he hosted movie nights, the way he'd promise, just one more scene. It wasn't just the murder. It was the theft of everything Nathan would have become. Then came the day they met the boy responsible, Chanel Jackson. During pre-trial hearings, they sat behind him, watching the back of his head as he whispered to his lawyer and smirked at news cameras. Every small movement, every flash of indifference, felt like a new cut to wounds that had barely begun to close. When the trial began, Denise Potter prepared a victim impact statement. She wrote it at the kitchen table where Nathan used to do his homework, crying between every sentence. She wanted to remind the court that her son wasn't just a name in a case file. He was a person. "Judge," she said through tears, "there is nothing you can say to bring back our Nathan, but your sentence can make sure no one else feels this pain." The courtroom that exploded. April 16, 2010, Milwaukee County Courthouse. A room packed with grief, tension, and a silence so heavy it could crack. The air itself seemed to brace for something inevitable. At the defense table sat 19-year-old Chanel Jackson, stone-faced, hands cuffed, eyes scanning the crowd like a predator in a cage. Across from him, the Potter family sat clutching tissues, hearts pounding, waiting for a sentence that could never undo what had been done. Judge Rebecca Dallett took her seat, her expression unreadable but firm. She had presided over dozens of homicide cases before, but this one was different. There was something about Chanel's demeanor, the way he looked at the world as though consequence was a rumor, that disturbed even the most composed court staff. The courtroom knew this wasn't just a verdict day, it was Judgment Day. One by one, family members of Nathan Potter stood to speak. They spoke of sleepless nights, of the emptiness that had hollowed out their home. "Is there such a thing as pure evil?" one asked. "We think so. The words echoed through the chamber like a prayer and a curse all at once. Chanel didn't flinch. He smirked. When Judge Dallett finally began her sentencing, she didn't rush her words. "Mr. Jackson," she said evenly, "this case rises to the level reserved for the most serious of crimes." Chanel stared straight at her. His face twisted into something between confusion and contempt. "For first-degree intentional homicide," she continued, "I sentence you to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole." Chanel snapped. He leapt from his seat, shouting obscenities at the judge, the prosecutors, and the Potters. Deputies rushed forward as he tried to fight them off, his voice cracking with fury. "You can't do this to me!" he screamed, thrashing against their grip. Pepper spray filled the air as the courtroom erupted into chaos. His mother screamed from the gallery, "Don't touch my son!" Others shouted back, "He's a killer!" The clash of grief and rage turned the room into a storm of shouting, sobbing, and fists pounding on benches. The judge fled the bench as deputies dragged Chanel out, his voice echoing, "You'll regret this." That courtroom brawl would replay endlessly on national news. But behind the noise, one truth lingered. The arrogance that fueled a teenager's smirk had finally destroyed him. Justice had spoken, but it came with scars that no sentence could heal. The mother who refused to believe. After the sentencing chaos, as the courtroom emptied and the echoes of shouting faded, one voice still refused to be silenced, Rashette Jackson's. She was Chanel's mother, a woman torn between denial and devastation, standing before reporters in the courthouse hallway with trembling hands and a heart unwilling to accept the truth. "My son is not a monster," she said. The cameras swarmed her, microphones crowding her face as she tried to justify what no one could understand. To the public, her words sounded like blindness. To her, it was a mother's instinct to protect her child, no matter the horror he'd caused. She claimed she'd cried when she first saw Nathan Potter's story on the news, before realizing her own son was the killer. "I can't imagine what that mother went through," she had said. "I didn't have a clue my child had anything to do with it." But the footage said otherwise. News channels replayed the smirks, the mocking gestures, the fight with deputies. Every image chipped away at her defenses. Still, she stood firm. "He just lost his way," she insisted. "He's not evil." The public wasn't sympathetic, comment sections filled with rage. "He laughed at the victim's family," one person wrote. "You raised a monster," another said. The Potter family stayed silent, unwilling to argue with grief that had already burned itself raw.
Here for you. I love you too, baby. Okay.
Rashette's community turned against her too. Neighbors whispered. Friends kept their distance. She had become the killer's mother, and her name carried the weight of his crime. Yet, beneath her stubborn denial, there was guilt. A quiet, gnawing guilt she couldn't silence. Late at night, she replayed their last phone call before he fled Milwaukee. He'd said, "Don't worry, Ma, I'll be fine." She'd believed him. She visited him once after the sentencing. In the visitation room, separated by glass, Chanel still smirked. "They just hate me because I didn't cry," he said. She pressed her palm against the glass, tears streaming down her face. "You took a life, Chanel," she whispered. "You took everything from them." He looked away, uninterested, tapping his fingers on the table. The uncle who turned him in.
Here for you.
While his mother defended him, someone else in the family had made the hardest choice of all, his uncle, Gerald Hawkins. The man who'd opened his home to a fugitive and then opened his phone to call the police. It was a decision that would fracture his family forever, but save his conscience from something even heavier. When Chanel fled Milwaukee after the murder, it wasn't panic that guided him. It was arrogance. He boarded a Greyhound bus to Mississippi with a bag full of clothes, a little cash, and the belief that he was untouchable. He knew his Uncle Gerald lived there, a working man, quiet, the kind who didn't ask many questions. For 2 months, Chanel lived in his house, eating dinner at the same table every night, sleeping under the same roof as the man who would eventually betray him for the sake of what was right. At first, Gerald didn't suspect much. His nephew said he just needed a break from Milwaukee. But news travels fast, even hundreds of miles away. A neighbor's TV blared a Milwaukee broadcast one night. The headline, "Student Gunned Down in River West Robbery." The suspect's name rolled across the screen. Chanel Jackson. Gerald froze, the dinner fork halfway to his mouth. He didn't confront him immediately. For days, he watched. He noticed the way Chanel avoided eye contact when the news was on. The way he stayed up late pacing the porch, chain smoking, pretending not to hear the reports. Finally, Gerald asked, "You got anything to tell me, boy?" Chanel looked at him for a long moment, then just said, "Don't worry about it, Uncle. It's handled." Gerald lay awake for nights, torn between loyalty and morality. He'd helped raise Chanel, bought him school supplies, and tried to steer him away from the streets. But he couldn't live knowing he was sheltering a murderer. "You just can't take anybody's life," he later told reporters. "That's wrong, no matter who you are." On September 14th, 2009, he picked up the phone and called the police. "He's here," he told them. Within hours, the house was surrounded. Officers moved in, quiet but swift. Chanel didn't resist, just looked at his uncle and said, "You too, huh?" After the arrest, some in the Jackson family called Gerald a traitor. He received threats, angry phone calls, and even warnings to watch his back at family gatherings. But he didn't waver. "You have to do what's right," he said in an interview, voice steady. "No one can make me change that." The smile that broke the city. When the footage of Chanel Jackson's sentencing hit the evening news, Milwaukee stopped and stared. A teenager laughing in court, smirking at a grieving family, and cursing a judge after being sentenced to life without parole. It was the kind of moment that pierced the city's soul. The image froze mid-frame on countless television screens. Chanel, eyes gleaming with mockery, a smirk twisting into something feral as deputies wrestled him to the ground. It became the face of heartless violence, a haunting emblem of arrogance that no one could forget. Social media erupted. Hashtags like "You No Remorse" and "Justice" for Nathan trended across Wisconsin. People argued about whether Chanel was born evil or shaped by his environment, but no one defended the smirk. It was too cruel, too deliberate. One local headline captured the mood best. "He laughed while they cried." For Nathan Potter's family, that image was torture. Every replay on television was another wound. Every article another reminder that the world was watching their pain. But for the people of Milwaukee, it was more than a murder case. It was a mirror reflecting something uncomfortable. Chanel wasn't an outsider from another city. He was one of theirs, a boy from their own streets who had looked at life and found no value in it. Inside the courthouse, even court staff whispered about it afterward. One bailiff said, "I've seen murderers cry, scream, or go blank, but I've never seen one smile like that." Reporters echoed the same sentiment. The smirk wasn't confusion or shock, it was control. In later interviews, when asked about that moment, Chanel's mother said, "He was scared. That's how he deals with fear." But no one believed it. Fear doesn't make you mock the mother of the man you murdered. Fear doesn't make you smile as a judge condemns you to die behind bars. The price of arrogance.
And I am going to sentence Mr. Jackson to life imprisonment.
Inside the concrete walls of Waupun Correctional Institution, the echo of that smirk faded quickly. The cameras were gone, the stage was gone, and the teenage arrogance that once defined Chanel Jackson had nowhere left to hide. Prison isn't built for bravado. It strips you inch by inch until there's nothing left but the truth you've been running from. For Chanel, that truth came at a cost he could no longer laugh through. At first, he tried. In the early weeks, guards reported him as uncooperative and defiant. He mouthed off to officers, refused orders, and still carried that same smirk other inmates noticed. To them, he was a novelty. The kid who laughed at a judge, who mocked a grieving family on camera. But novelty fades fast in prison. The men around him weren't impressed by his attitude. They'd seen worse. Some had buried friends. Others had been betrayed by people just like him. The laughter stopped when the lights went out.
Rises to that level.
As days bled into months, the walls began to close in. Isolation does that. It turns noise into memory. The clang of doors, the sound of footsteps, the distant hum of a television somewhere. It all becomes background static to the guilt you're trying to ignore. In those endless nights, even Chanel's arrogance couldn't fill the silence. But there was no redemption arc waiting for Chanel. No sudden transformation, no jailhouse enlightenment. Just time. Slow, relentless time. The same boy who once laughed at a mother's grief was now just another inmate number, another body moving through the system. The arrogance that had once made him infamous now made him invisible. The debate over justice. When the dust settled, Milwaukee was divided. For some, Chanel Jackson's life sentence without parole was the only fitting end for someone who showed such cruelty. For others, it sparked an uncomfortable question. What do we do with youth who kill without remorse? At 19, Chanel was technically an adult, but still young enough for psychologists to argue that his brain wasn't fully developed. Did justice mean retribution or rehabilitation that could never come? The courtroom footage had already shaped public opinion long before sentencing. To the nation, Chanel wasn't a confused teenager. He was the smirking face of evil. But among legal scholars and social advocates, his case became a test of how America handles young offenders. Wisconsin, like many states, had no automatic leniency for violent youth crimes. The horror of Nathan Potter's execution-style murder left little room for compassion. Still, the argument persisted. Nathan's parents didn't want to hear debates about justice reform. For them, the sentence wasn't vengeance. It was protection. He's proven he can kill without thought, John Potter said in an interview. That's not a mistake. That's who he is. They didn't want their son's memory turned into a case study or statistic. They wanted peace. Yet the conversation didn't stop. True crime shows revisited the case years later, replaying the same courtroom brawl, the same smirk, the same haunting footage. Commentators dissected it like a cultural artifact, asking what kind of world raises a boy who laughs at death. Some argued that calling him evil was too simple, that evil was a symptom, not the cause. Others countered that certain actions forfeit the right to empathy altogether. In Mississippi, Gerald Hawkins, the uncle who turned Chanel in, watched those debates quietly. People can talk about justice all they want, he said once, but justice is when the killing stops. For him, morality wasn't theoretical. It was action. Turning in his nephew was justice enough. Meanwhile, Chanel's accomplice, Derek Thomas, had already served his 12-year sentence and walked free, stirring his own wave of controversy. Why did the gunman get life while his partner in crime got a chance to rebuild? The question gnawed at both sides of the justice debate. The legacy of a laugh years have passed since that day in the courtroom, but the sound of Chanel Jackson's laughter still lingers in Milwaukee's memory like an echo that refuses to fade. It wasn't loud. It was short, sharp, almost casual, but it carried the weight of a nation's outrage. That laugh became something more than arrogance. It became a symbol of the moment when empathy failed, when a teenager's smile exposed the darkest corners of human indifference. For the Potter family, time hasn't healed much. Their son Nathan remains frozen at 21, a bright, gentle dreamer immortalized in photos and home videos. Every year on July 6th, they gather to light a candle in his memory. Denise places one by his old desk, where his unfinished film notes still sit. John stands quietly beside her, always saying the same thing. We keep the light on for him. Their pain hasn't lessened, but their purpose has sharpened, to ensure no one forgets his name. Schools and local organizations have used Nathan's story as a lesson, not about fear, but about empathy. His professors at the University of Wisconsin created a small scholarship fund for aspiring filmmakers who embody the same compassion and creativity he once showed. Each year, one student receives it and writes a short film dedicated to him. The project has become a quiet rebellion against the cruelty that ended his life. In the years since, the courtroom video has resurfaced online many times, on documentaries, YouTube compilations, social media feeds. It's often stripped of context, replayed for shock value. But behind the virality lies the human cost. The families who relive their worst day every time it trends. The Potters have learned to live with that haunting fame because, as Denise once said, if his story keeps one person from pulling a trigger, then maybe something good came out of all this pain. Sean-El sits behind bars today, his name rarely spoken, his smirk long gone. Those who've seen him recently say he's quiet now, aging fast, withdrawn, a shell of the boy who once defied the world with a sneer. Perhaps even he realizes that laughter can't outlast guilt.